So, here's a quaint little story I'm only now recollecting for the first time in my adult life, having faded slowly in the memory since the event actually occurred on one day during my teenage years. I was 11, and it was the summer that existed immediately before my first year of secondary school was due to start. Having been an academic boy of sorts, Mother, keen to ensure this desirable trait continued, encouraged me to start my preparation of the educational year almost as soon as my previous one had ended. I'm not ashamed to admit that even now, my relentless pursuit of intelligence and resulting lack of social graces was done purely as a means to make her proud, and never once in order to develop my own enjoyment of life. Get a load of this fuckboy. As such, when I saw in the paper that the ever-popular paranormal expert Professor Luke Kane was hosting a talk in my local community hall, I jumped at the opportunity to attend. Man, that's a sentence. If only to find out what on earth paranormal meant, as the subject was not included on my junior school curriculum. To a wireframed boy like myself, the hall was vast, so vast in fact, I was sure that if a bird ever stumbled into it, it should live the rest of its days under the illusion of complete, limitless freedom. I was amongst the last to arrive, and so took my seat as quickly and discreetly as possible before mere seconds later, Professor Kane took to the stage. He was dressed in a long cloak-like outer jacket, which made any other garments beneath it aesthetically redundant, though I was confident he was wearing some, and a top hat that he never once removed during the whole presentation. He looked the epitome of knowledge, and the silence that befell his entrance confirmed a similar reputation. Maybe it was something else. He spoke well with a literacy that even I, at the zenith of scholastic understanding, found hard to understand in places. I felt myself becoming cleverer with every word, and I couldn't help but look forward to returning home and relaying all I'd learnt to Mother at dinner. She will be so impressed, I thought. It was at point about halfway through proceedings that Professor Kane asked, in a rhetorical manner I did and still believe, whether anyone in the audience had lagged behind in their grasp of his explanation as to why ghosts couldn't possibly exist. In typical English resolve, no one dared speak up, although I was certain not everyone could have followed such a convoluted theory. However, a hand was raised atop an arm being to an old lady sitting 3 or 4 rows ahead of me. Professor Kane, though slightly miffed at the situation, humored it.
"What of Tharbles?"
asked the lady. "Tharbles?" asked the professor. "What are Tharbles?"
"Tharbles," said the lady, "are the little goblin creatures we can't see, but are there. You know, not invisible, but real good at hiding. They're on our shoulders, Mr. Kane."
The professor was knocked well off his stride at this line of questioning. He tried to brush it off in a professional manner, but the lady, observing that no one was accepting her inquiries as genuine, continued determinedly.
"You haven't heard of goblins, Tharbles? The goblins, they're with us now. And when we go home, they'll be there. And when we eat, and when we sleep, and brush our teeth, they'll be there as well. They're watching us."
"Goblins, madam? The little green creatures that populate our children's fairy tales? You believe that they are watching us?" asked Professor Kane.
"They are."
"And where are they now? If they are watching us, I don't see them, I mean."
"In this room right now, There'll just be one,
insisted the old lady.
and it'll be in the back of a man in the furthest corner of the room, so as to see everyone and not be seen itself, see?
I confide in you that when the old lady spoke of this ghoulish entity and its mannerisms, dwelling solely in her imaginations or not, my spine shivered at one or two hairs stood to attention toward the back of my neck. Well, thank you for your question, dear lady, but I rather think you've been reading too many fantasy books. There are no such thing as Tharbles, I can assure you, said the professor.
That's what you wish, 'cause you ain't never seen one,
said the lady, with a certain amount of bullishness that she didn't have before. Fix that sentence. This is a Tharble world.
They don't like us, so they kill us. Have done for centuries and will do forever.
Murmurs erupted, as much as murmurs can erupt, throughout the audience. I assume that these side-mouth conversations most likely centered on the old lady's mental capacity, and how sad it was that with age came a delusional state, like the one she was portraying. "What do you mean, kill us?" asked one faceless man from the crowd. The woman laughed. I recall in a manner reserved only for the most ludicrous suggestions and side-splitting jokes.
Why do you think we all got a habit of dying, man? Old age is what the doctors will tell you, but I know trees as old as my long dead pa still standing. The Tharbles are there, behind your shoulder or leaning on your head, pulling your strings, till the day they get you.
The professor sighed, and I remembered being comforted by the gesture. He clearly felt the old lady had a great deal more than one screw loose, lending fuel to my hopes that she was saying was the simple ramblings of an overactive imagination, and nothing else. It was unfortunate that the situation had now grown to be unsustainable, and Professor Kane had to request the old lady be escorted from the hall by a pair of gentlemen who I guessed to be general overseers of the building, whilst being almost literally dragged away. The lady berated Professor Kane and the audience as a whole, actually, for rejecting what she'd said, despite her having taken a great risk in saying it. The rest of the presentation continued without a hitch, and a great deal of brain-achingly in-depth topics later, the hall was vacated, and I returned home to Mother. I remember talking eagerly, and without pause, over our cabbage soup about what I'd learned, or what I thought I'd learned, from my evening with the great Professor Kane. The conversation must have been fascinating, as I distinctly remember my babysitter Jade nodding in and out of consciousness throughout its course. It wasn't until I was mopping up the excess soup in my bowl with a buttered slice of bread that the old lady forced herself into the forefront of my mind. With nothing else to say, I relayed all the lady's thoughts to Mother there and then. Mother, to my surprise, listened intently to every word as though I were spilling some sort of secret truth to her for the first time. I couldn't help but notice her intense reaction. "You don't believe it, do you?" I asked. She smiled, the kind of disingenuous smile a child can always tell is meant for their comfort, and so does little to comfort them.
"Do you remember your father?" she asked. "A little round fellow he was, and bald as a coot."
I could remember him, very well in fact, but I wondered how he, a man 18 months dead, related to Tharbles.
"He spent much of his time alone. An introverted person, I think they call it, locked up in his study for days on end. And before he,
Mother's use of in this instant meant hung himself with an old belt.
He swore he was being driven loony by the constant feeling that something was pressing down on his shoulders and head.
I argued the point that doctors had said that father's brain was broken down, medicine at the time not being nearly as precise as it is these days, and he never thought straight about a single thing since before I could remember right, up until his death. But what, I pressed, does this have to do with the old lady? And what she called Tharbles? Mother proposed that the reason my father died so young, the reason he was once a 6-foot-tall, long-haired 20-year-old that ended up being buried a 5'5", bald 36-year-old, was because he, the lonely man he had become, had a Tharble with him for the vast majority of his adult life. I couldn't accept it. If this is true, then where's the Tharble that is supposedly watching us right now, I asked. Like the old lady said, there's always at least one. Keep your eyes on me. It's just as mine are on you, said Mother. And suppose your baby sister in her high chair right now, all but fast asleep, has her head tilted slightly down, as though something is weighing upon it. A few seconds passed as we both wrestled with the urge to check the dear little girl. Mother caved first, and as she did, my spine shivered, and the hairs on my back of my neck stood up. Just as they did in the community hall, I turned to little Jade as well. She was sitting completely alone and drifting off as babies do in that adorable, regretful manner. Mother smiled, and I smiled back. And the idea that she had been playing a cruel joke on me from the very start started to grow in my subconscious. We washed up together before I took Jade to her cot in Mother's room, tucking her in and kissing her on the forehead, then turning the lights out and leaving her to sleep. I had a bath and used the time to go over the day's events, but it wasn't until I grabbed my toothbrush from beside the sink that I noticed again a shiver run down my neck and the hairs on my neck standing on end. It was then that I realized I had been the person sitting in the furthermost corner of that community hall. I was the one not being watched at when my mother looked to Jane during the moment at dinner. And as I turned to brush my teeth, I looked upon myself in the bathroom mirror and once again felt a Tharble forced to hide himself behind my back.